So let me just start by saying this session is really about unlocking solutions, and it is really about transformational sciences, the roadmap. How do we incorporate Africa and give it a bigger voice and recognize excellence in science in Africa? So we're going to use one example, and I'm going to start by just introducing myself. I'm Lise Korsten from South Africa, the University of Pretoria. But I'm also the president of the African Academy of Sciences. So we have a very specific program and to develop our young scientists, to create pathways for them, to focus on the diaspora, link them back into the continent, and enable them to create research centers of excellence in the continent. So this session is a joint session from the Frontiers Research Foundation and the Academy of Science. We really want to work towards a platform for dialogue and put forward action, plans of actions to take the continent further. And we want to, in this case, use the example of planetary boundary sciences. And I think it's very important looking at the paradigm shift potential that we have and how we can overcome these silos. So the discussion today will explore how we can create radical changes for transition and a climate resilient future in Africa. And we want to bring together African scientists, policymakers, NGOs, industry, etc. So I'm going to use a case study today to illustrate to you the complexity of addressing the key issues in, for instance, biodiversity. So I will use an example, and our audience and panel members will also, I will introduce them now, and they will give us their view and comments as we go forward. I just want to mention that the African Academy of Science has now finalized an agreement with the Frontiers Planet Prize, and we will introduce the African Planet Prize winner to recognize and empower African scientists in our research community, focusing then specifically on the global big planet challenges. So behind me, I have the first slide, opening slide around open science, the Open Science Charter, and as you know, it has been signed. It is proposed, and I'm not sure who has been reading the Open Science Charter, and we will go into that a little bit later. But let me first introduce the group, the panel members. We have Professor Remi Quirion, as you already know, you've seen him on the stage several times, and he's also the chief scientist of Québec since 2011, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, I think it's enough. And then we also have Daan Toit, and he's from the South African government Department of Science and Innovation. I think you're all very familiar with him. And then we also have Eugene Mutimura. You also know him very well. He's the Executive Secretary of Rwanda's National Council of Science and Technology. You've also seen him on stage. And then also Andrea Hinwood, and she's the Chief Scientist of the United Nations Environmental Program, and we've also heard them. So this is a significant audience, and I would like their comment on the Open Science Charter. I hope you have seen it, read it, and it's putting on the table what we've really been talking about the last 2 days, about how can we achieve an open science platform by 2030. Is it possible? Can we uphold peer review quality and transparency, linking it into quality and strengthening, very importantly, the trust in science? So with that, I'm going to move on to a very important topic that I just want to put on the table, and then I'm going to open it up to the members. Climate action. Why now? I think the time is at a tipping point. And I think it's time for us to go beyond science evidence, policy, and science diplomacy, and we have to take this discourse into public spaces for action. I also think it's very important the arguments around polluter should pay and that the non-polluter is exempt from action. This is to me also wrong because we are all responsible to make a difference. Otherwise, we will continue towards the tipping point. And we're going to hear a bit of an argument around the air quality, and particularly then in Africa, which I think will be a very important topic to also put on the table. And then finally, before I put the next slide on, will be climate change impact on the most poorest of nations and its people, and most importantly, our environment and Africa's unique biodiversity. So with that, if I can get the next slide, I've prepared a slide for you, and I think they're just looking for it at the moment. And the example that I want to use is the rhino as the tipping point. And I hope they can get the slide. They're busy looking for it. And I want to tell you, before I prepared for this session, I was thinking in terms of biodiversity, what's important for us in Africa. And I was thinking, okay, maybe the gorilla, it's so important in Rwanda, it's a story to be told. And then I thought, well, maybe the elephant. You know, the elephant in the room is we are not taking these difficult conversations further. And I personally love the elephant, and there's a whole lot of debate and issues around the elephant, and it is such a beautiful animal. Alternatively, we have the honeybee, if we want to go smaller, and many other very important stories to tell. But I very specifically want to use the example of the rhino, the African rhino, the black and white rhino. And I see the slide's not on the screen, but let me just put it on the table. Oh, there we are. So, and that's, I think we can have a whole map of what is the most important critical issues that this continent face. And are we focusing and enabling our researchers to work on those topics and come up with a solution, given the climate change challenges? And if I could get the next slide. What I've tried to do here is to put this on the table to discuss as an example. So if we take the current scenario around the African rhino, and as you know, the white and black rhino is, the populations are under severe stress on the continent. And there's a big debate currently around hunting, trophy hunting in general with animals. And I think you're all familiar with the elephant in the room story about Botswana telling Germany, if you ban trophy hunting, we will send you 20,000 elephants. Well, if you've been in the Kruger National Park, you will see what is the impact of 20,000 elephants on nature and on your baobab trees and marula trees. So it's a difficult conversation. It depends on who you're talking to. Are you talking to the scientist, the nature conservationist? There's also a discussion at the moment in South Africa around hunting for meat, bushmeat. So bushmeat is seen as a food source for the local poor communities. And the question is really, is meat, game meat, a viable source? It could be quite a big economic spinner. You could commercialize it, export it. It could be an exotic product for the export market. What will that impact be on our nature conservation areas and your population? So hunting for meat, trophy hunting, how does that link? And then on the other hand of the coin, we have poaching. And as you all know, the detrimental effect of poaching and the rhino horn and the impact and the research that has been done, for instance, to remove the rhino horns or to put microchips in the rhino horns to try and track and trace it. And this is a very difficult discussion unless we get governments involved and unless we talk openly about illegal trade in rhino horns. And then there's, of course, the huge impact of habitat loss, urbanization, encroachment, farming communities, really negatively impacting on our wildlife. And then, of course, the most important tipping point, climate change, and how that is impacting on floods, drought, and very importantly, if we use the rhinos example, a new scientific paper that was published, in fact, this week, and that's why I selected this topic, was about the detrimental impact on rhino population with the increase in heat and the fact that rhinos can't sweat. So they need water, they need mud. So how do we protect these endangered species? I'm going to open it to the floor and ask the members of this committee to comment using this as a case study example. How do we get these conversations, these difficult conversations, out on the floor, and then finally we can talk about air quality as another example. So let's start on, shall I start with Daan on that side? Daan.
Thank you very much, Lise, for introducing this very important discussion, and thank you also to Frontiers for bringing us together for this discussion, because it speaks, it's one example, but it speaks at the heart of the challenge all of us in the science community are called to respond, and that is societal advancement, which starts with ensuring environmental sustainability. So perhaps 3 points to make. I think the first one is that the problem statement you've sketched is not unique to Africa. So we are here in Africa. We're very grateful to Rwanda for being the first African country to host INGSA 2024. And the challenges we are interrogating are those which we are going to look at through a specific lens of African science. But these challenges and how we respond to them are global challenges. And I'm not sure there's any science system, whether in Africa, in Europe, Asia, North America, who have actually gotten this right. So it's a challenge which is not uniquely African, and perhaps if we as Africa can get it right, this could be a contribution we can make to global science policy formulation. So I think the second point which the problem statement calls for, it's again nothing new, no rocket science, but just emphasizes the need that in this age, the scientific enterprise is one which is, whether you call it multi, trans, pluridisciplinary, this is a collected effort. And if my minister was here, Minister Nzimandi, because this is a specific point for him, he would underline the critical importance of the social sciences and humanities in responding to these challenges. Most of us come from perhaps not most of us, but many of us come from a background from all the natural sciences, some would say the physical, the hard sciences, and those are often the more exciting ones. I mean, my case in point, the big projects which often excite in South Africa is the astronomy, the square kilometer array, and other type projects. But if we are going to respond to this problem statement, whether it's environmental sustainability or other societal challenges, it has to have a critical role of the humanities and social sciences. And we saw that during COVID-19, where perhaps the most decisive contributions early on in helping South Africa to respond to COVID-19 it was not only those at the forefront of epidemiological surveys, of working on drug and vaccine development, but actually our social scientists who told us, what do South Africans really think of COVID-19? What do they think of vaccines? How do they respond to these measures our government implement? And so that would be my second point, the call for that integrative approach. And this is something which our academies and everyone should embrace. And then just thirdly, lastly, if you look at the science policy formulation in South Africa now, 20 years ago we adopted the national R&D strategy, which was very specific of identifying priority scientific disciplines, priority technology platforms in which South Africa should invest. Now, 20 years later, we have now a new 10-year decadal plan, and the approach is completely different. It is, what are the key societal challenges? What are those issues which matter to South Africa, and that would be, for example, education. How do we deal with our massive unemployment? How do we prepare our society for technology disruptive change? And then the mission is through by completely embracing the values and principles of open science. How do we mobilize society as a whole and science as a whole to respond to these challenges? And I think that's what's also required here. Thanks, Lise.
Thank you very much for that oversight, Daan. That's very important, three very important points. And I'll summarize at the end, but I'm going to ask Remi for your input, and I know you have an important meeting tomorrow, which links to this story.
Well, yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you as well to Frontière, and thanks that Frontière doesn't work. Does it work now? Okay. So thanks Frontière, and also they have accepted, and the speaker here as well, last minute change in the schedule for various reasons. We really appreciate that. The example of the rhino. Of course, for us in Quebec, in Canada, we don't see them too often. But we have an animal that we known as caribou. And caribou are in danger of extinction in Quebec. They are not aggressive. It's not like rhino. They are not aggressive, but the slide that you show, similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
As a science advisor for many years, 4 different governments, 3 different parties made science advice in relation to these caribou. In the end, the answer was no. Not on the basis of science, but on the basis of some of the elements that you raise. Food for some community, also economy in some region of Quebec. So this is, as you said, very, very complex. And as Daan said, yes, you have applied, rhino applied to here, but there is other issue all over the world. And it's not easy to frame the answer, to give proper advice to government, maybe in retrospect. And I think you have started to mention that we need to involve the public much earlier in this type of discussion. It's still too often discussion between university experts, high-level policymaker, and government. And we're missing a very critical part, having the public on board to participate into these discussions. They could represent NGO, they could represent other organizations, but to have the public, and to have the public early on is important. One thing that we're trying to do, and we don't have the perfect answer in relation to climate change, what does it mean for me, for my family, on my street in Montreal? You have fabulous report from GIEC and all that. It's too abstract. And if a national government say this is this and that, still too abstract. So you bring it to the local condition, I think, very, very important. 2 other points, data, these days are absolutely essential. We talk a lot about AI, good and bad data, but data and access to data are critically important. And their open science is also critically important. And again, although my next door neighbor may not read this science paper, open access and finding ways to better translate these data, not the last paper in Nature, but overall when you have a series of results and you can summarize them for the general public, I think is absolutely essential. Funding, and if I put us more the funding side to it, and maybe Daan will agree or disagree, I don't know, finding ways to support, to fund crazy idea. Because now it has become so competitive that you don't do that anymore. Scientists apply and they need to be very safe. If they bring something a bit different, the preview panel will say, well, we're not sure, they did not tell me the temperature of the water and so on. We need to find ways to change that. There is various programs that are started here and there in the world, but we need to do more on that. And what could be helpful, and here I will be certainly a bit provocative, maybe we need to kill university, or at least change them for the good of society. And I think it's still a lot of culture to change there. It would be difficult, would be challenging, but I think we really need to change the model. Otherwise, I'm not very optimistic that it will really happen in terms of key challenge of our society.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a very good point. I'm just looking at two cases now of killing, and not only killing. There's a famous rhino in Tanzania, John, that was killed, and I know the president's trying, with DNA analysis, trying to determine what was the reason for his death. But many game rangers being killed in pursuit of protecting an important animal for us. And these are the challenges, and I know there's many examples in the world that I think each country can actually go and put forward their top animal that they feel should really be protected, most importantly. And with that, I'm going to ask Eugene for his input. And from your point of view, how do you see this biodiversity and discussions, uncomfortable discussions?
Thank you, Lise, for a very insightful discussion. And thank you for putting up this panel to discuss these elements in the context of science advice. You gave several examples and scenarios of elephant in the room, and hunting the meat, and the communities, and several other examples. And I think at the center of this is about science advice and conservation of nature, as well as other elements related to climate change, sustainable environment, and others, which are quite related. And I think the most important elements here are related to institutions that are expected to implement certain policies, and the policies themselves, but also institutions that are supposed to do research and have evidence and data to inform policy. But let me reiterate what Remi emphasized in another perspective. How do we empower our communities to understand more about climate change, nature conservation, good environment, so that they understand it in the context of helping themselves or helping uplift the standards of living of citizens? I should say, for instance, it is true that in some countries, in some perspectives, when you talk about these topics, there is a level of less understanding of these topics in the context of real science. But we have lived to see that if you don't abide with the policies and implementation, for instance, on climate change, resilient environment, we suffer the consequences. Last 2 years, you may know that Rwanda has had one of the roughest times of climate change mudslides that claimed several lives of people in the northern parts and western parts of Rwanda. And so this is real evidence that if you don't have strong policies and implementation, this is going to impact on the lives of the citizens. And at the center of this, where is evidence? Where is data? And so we have some institutions in Rwanda that are expected to be the custodians of ensuring good environment in terms of conservation, like REMA, or Rwanda Environment Management Authority. We have also other institutions that are working hard to monitor the geospatial data within our environment and see if that can feed into real science and data to inform policy. And so these are some of the major perspectives, but I want to reiterate one important element. When we are sitting here as leaders, as scientists, as policymakers, where is the community out there? Where is civil society organization? Where are people leading NGOs? Where are people that are supposed to communicate science? Where are the people supposed to talk about the need to conserve the environment and demystify science and policy so that the common man understands it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And immediately let me move over to Andrea because she has to go. And just take this perspective into another very important challenge for us.
Well, I was going to actually talk about pollution and waste on the African continent, but having listened to my speakers, I've decided that I'm going to make a very bold statement, and I'll explain why. So I've got two examples on the African continent that I'd like to talk about. I think that if we addressed food security on the African continent, we would actually resolve the problem with conservation. Oh, yeah. And I say that with two examples. We ran a global environmental foresight process. We collected a whole range of issues across the globe, but we had a sense-making session in Africa comprised of scientists from across different disciplines and different countries. What was really interesting was this is a really young group of scientists who came together in Nairobi to talk about what are the environmental issues affecting the continent, but importantly, what are the solutions? So I said to this group, I said, so what is the solution to actually dealing with climate, biodiversity, pollution and waste? And they said, well, if you could get one thing right, it's actually addressing food security and food sustainability. And while you're at it, if you address those issues, then we can actually deal with resource sovereignty, governance in terms of the way that we manage a range of issues. And the biggest thing that I really like, and I've still got the poster in my office, and we discussed a range of issues. It was just fabulous. And in the middle, they wrote hope, and Africa is the hope for the global community. Now, having sat in many fora, I'm of that view, because my next example is that I then was invited, actually, when you live in Nairobi, I get to live a very different life, and I got invited to a very senior official's home. But I ended up meeting a group of Kenyans who are working in the community around the area of Loldega. They are a community that is now working across agriculture, conservation, but they're actually collecting all of the data on carbon sequestration and how that is working with different agricultural practices, different conservation practices, but also how they give that back to the community. And their view is all of this data is going to be available to all of us to actually look at, because it's meant to be open, accessible, transparent. And I provide these examples because these are the solutions on the ground with the people that are being impacted, but that are putting in place local solutions, but they are going to be providing their data that we can actually then use across the world as examples and modify depending on where we are. So for me, I take that hope, and Africa has been my home now for 3 years, and even though I'm not born African, the continent is still mine. I'm going to miss it very much when I leave, but anyway.
Thank you very much. That's a very good example, and I really like the food security and sustainable food systems, and that's my personal workspace as well, so I do believe it's a priority for Africa. I also like Africa, the hope for the world, and I think it's the youth that will drive that. It will come from them. I'm going to ask if there's any questions or comments from the audience. We still have a few minutes left, 7 minutes left. If there's any comments from the floor. I see one hand. If we can just get a mic over there. Can I just quick? Okay. So I think it's very important. We've had 4 very important inputs, and we would like to hear from the audience, and then I will wrap up. Okay.
So thank you, Lise, for putting this panel together, and great panel. So thank you to the speakers. So just to contextualize what I'm going to say. So this is not. I don't work in the biodiversity field. I'm not a scientist in the biodiversity field, but this is more of a lived experience, and I totally agree with everything that's been said. But just to add another case study and to go deeper to what Remi and Andrea, sorry.
Andrea.
I 300 2 seconds ago outside, Andrea has said, right? I think there's this real power in not, yes, having that evidence, but actually going to the communities that live within those problem areas. And I'll just give you an example from Kenya. So there's an area next to the Amboseli National Park, one of the most famous national parks, that actually engaged with the communities living there and built a model of community conservation. So where they leased pastoral land or ancestral land from the community, and then the community ran these camps in an eco-friendly camps. And not only that, they got to alternative food resources and were able to then use that funding to actually build their schools, and where now they're teaching conservation. So, they've got rid of the universities, they've got rid of everything. And the strong part of all of that is that they're actually using their endogenous knowledge to do this. So I agree, it's a systems level thinking. And just to say, so when I'm not doing science policy, I actually do documentaries. I'm a documentary maker. So I've actually worked in this area and have a documentary around it called The Elephants of Selengei. So it's a fascinating story, where data engages with the local community to really find these system level solutions. And I know it doesn't touch on everything, but it's amazing what local knowledge can do to transform, the issue that's closest to them. So I think I'll just a comment and case study to share. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's a very powerful comment. Is there any other comments from the floor or questions? If not, I'm going to ask each one and the panel members just to give a closing message, and then I will wrap up. Oh, there's one more question over there.
I was fighting my cake and the opportunity for the question. Yeah, thank you very much for the good insights. I think I want to take this opportunity, since we have our leaders and our senior, especially in the area of science. The previous session was talking about research and policy interface. And then when you link with this, you could see how, of course, we need to involve the communities. So, but what are the approaches? What are the best way to involve the communities? And what communities are we talking about? Are they the communities, like the way I understand, let's say I'm going to the village and start involving them in a research project, or to what extent do we have to involve them? We have tried in the past, where we have a model which was even supported by the National Council for Science and Technology on Society of University Village Initiative, where you take graduates from the university and then you work with them. They are located in the community as a way of transferring these skills. But the challenge we still face is that the communities themselves, they need certain level of education and to get acquainted on those challenges, because the understanding and the perception they have on an issue is totally different from our science perspective. So I still remain on the aspect, how do we really define the best approach to reach and talk to the communities, and how do we target which community to work with? Thanks again.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm actually going to ask Eugene to comment on that, because I think you gave a bit of example.
Yeah. So Alfred is right that some of our communities may not have the right understanding, but it is our role as leaders to empower them. We need to empower them, we need to educate them, and then we need to cooperate and collaborate with them after they have the right understanding. That's the most important. You can always figure out which community to start with, but it's very, very important that the community understands their role in nature conservation, in climate change, so that they are part of the process to make an impact and change.
Lise, can I?
Yes, Daan, please.
I think responding to the last question, which is very relevant, I think part of the challenge is even in the way we phrase the question, which I completely understand. How do we involve the communities in our projects? I mean, that's part of the problem. It's our projects, our ideas, and So there's this other, we sort of want to involve, sometimes for corporate social responsibility, of course we know better. So part of the answer, and it's a rich discussion, we can be here all afternoon, is actually rethinking. I mean, how do we change the whole process, the conduct of science? I mean, that's why in South Africa we have what we call the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Office, which is exactly changing that. Because, yeah, wherever these communities are, they may not have our reference frameworks and our experience, but they have others. They have other huge knowledge resources which people like me in the policy making don't have. So if we're truly going to embrace open science, I mean, that third pillar of open science, which we often neglect, science which becomes an all of society enterprise, an enterprise which is open to society. So that for me is the answer. It's how do these projects not being seen as government projects or scientist projects, but it is truly an effort which is co-owned and co-designed by all relevant stakeholders.
And maybe if I could just
Thank
add
you.
one thing.
Remi,
Be patient. This takes time. It will not happen overnight. It may take a couple of years. You need to develop a relationship, trust. The community need to trust you. You're not there just to get data from them and then you disappear. We did that a lot, mistake like that in Canada. So, but that, I'm hopeful that it will change. And yeah, one of the advantages of Africa, hope, as mentioned, very young community, very young generations. Yeah, a lot of young adults and all that, compared to Canada, North America, and Europe, where of course the average age is high. So I think the brain of these young people are probably a bit more plastic than mine.
Andrea, would you like to?
I was actually going to say the same thing, because you can't identify a particular community that you're going to work in, that it actually has to be a much more ground up process. And then when you start to look at the examples of communities that have now actually sourced solar energy and they've put that in their communities, and now they can actually have kids who are actually learning at night instead of going out and collecting the wood for creating charcoal. And they are training the next community because they've actually started to derive other incomes by virtue of having the light in the chicken coop or the whatever else. So I think that I think we have to stop going, we want to work with that community, and it is about that open, accessible, and how do you make information tangible for the person who needs to use it where they are. And I guess I am hopeful that with time, as people start to see the changes, that they will want to implement things that are going to be of benefit to the community. So open, accessible, transparent, tangible science. Science is no good if you can't communicate it.
Thank you very much. Eugene, you want?
Let me give a brief example because of time. Rwanda Development Board is in charge of national park conservations, prevent poaching of animals and so forth and so on. Initially, it was impractical without involving the community. Now, they developed a model of involving the community and making sure that the finances and funds that come from national parks, including mountain gorilla and other parks, the communities benefit some funds. And then they train the communities to make sure that they do a lot of conservation of animals and look for these national parks. It is a success story when you involve the community.
Thank you very much. I wonder if there's a last word, because Andrea needs to go. Daan, you want the final word?
Well, not necessarily the final word, but I think part of the collective challenge for all of us is that we speak here about communities, but the communities are not in the room. I mean, they're not part of the discussion. I mean, we're so guilty of that in government. We often speak about how do we increase collaboration with business, but then it's just us bureaucrats talking. So I think that needs to change.
Thank you very much, Daan. The elephant in the room, the people, they are not here, the communities. So with that, I'm going to close. I just want to say, I think we need to make a big fire, sit around the fire, listen to the community stories, their experiences, their needs, and then we go and design our research projects based on funding initiatives and policy frameworks and global needs and challenges. And with that, I want to thank the panel first and foremost. Thank you for giving your time. And please go and have a nice lunch now. And I hope we can take this conversation further, and we will soon announce the African Planet Prize to support African bioconservation and biodiversity research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lise. Thank you.